Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. I'm Spencer Simpson.
And I'm Kelton Howell, and today we are continuing our series on power levels. And this time we're talking about card advantage. So if you go back and listen, or if you've been here with us the whole time, thanks for being here. We've already covered interaction, ramp, and just our general philosophy on power levels.
Yeah, so next week we're going to put it all together, and we're talking about deck building around power levels and how we can use ramp, interaction, card advantage, which we're going to be talking about today, and our philosophy of power levels to deck build appropriately to a specific power level. But that is not what we're talking about today. This week, we're talking about card advantage, as Kelton said.
Yeah, I feel like this one was probably the hardest one for us to come up with a solid recommendation. I also think that in general, in deck building, card advantage can frequently be a source of problems for a deck. If you are playing a deck and it's just not functioning correctly and you can't figure it out, you're like, I think I have enough ramp, I think I have enough interaction in it, and it's still just not playing right, it's probably card advantage. You probably just don't have enough card advantage in it.
Yeah, I really do feel that, I mean, we're going to give some recommendations today, but I think more often than not, people are not running enough card advantage. And in fact, one of the things that made this difficult is that it feels like it's hard to say, oh, that's too much card advantage. Like you're playing too much.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about the last couple of episodes, when it comes to interaction, it really felt more like art than science, where there's kind of like, it's kind of more vibes based, where lower power decks are generally going to have less interaction. Higher power decks need more to be able to deal with better threats. But the composition of interaction is also very fluid in terms of some of your interaction is board wipes, some of it is counter spells, some of it is, targeted removal. And so it's just this very fluid kind of arty thing. But last week when we talked about ramp, that's way more just science than art. Like we were able to dive into some calculations with a hypergeometric calculator and really figure out the optimal amount of ramp that pretty much most decks should be playing.
Yeah, and I would argue that one of the things that made it easier for ramp and interaction, even though, we said a ramp was a little more difficult than interaction, is that there's a pretty clear-cut delineation, especially for interaction, of what is more powerful than something else, right? Sure. And I think there's some of that in ramp and some of that in card draw, but it's not nearly the same.
Definitely. And when it comes to card advantage, it really falls right in between that kind of line between art and science, where we have been trying to do some calculations to figure out the optimal number, but card advantage spells actually make that inherently difficult, because if you see a card draw spell, it changes the number of cards that you're going to see past that point, and it changes the calculation.
Yeah, I mean, with ramp, again, please go listen to the episode, but we talked about seeing one or two pieces of ramp, right, at a specific point in the game. And if you see one piece of card draw and then you see two additional cards, that completely changes your probability of seeing two additional ones. It just makes it really difficult.
Yeah, and you want to see ramp early in a game.
Yeah.
Card draw you want to see early and late.
Yeah, you want to see it at all stages. So it makes it even harder to do those hypergeometric calculations because it's hard to know when you want to see it. And it really depends on like how your deck wants to play. Another thing that made it really difficult is that it's how much card draw you're playing really depends on a lot of different factors. Like, for example, if you're playing card draw in the command zone, you can probably get away with playing less card advantage in the 99 because you always have access to it in the command zone, right?
Yep. So that being said, we do think that we're able to reach a good recommendation, but as always, we'll talk about some of the additional considerations that might affect how many card advantage pieces that you'll be playing in your deck.
Yes. So we're going to start with our definition of card advantage, and you probably noticed that we've been saying card advantage rather than card draw. I do think I let one card draw slip in there, but we're trying to be really explicit about card advantage today, and it's because our definition is somewhat expanded beyond just spells that net you additional cards in hand.
Yeah, and so that definition really falls into three different, pretty broad categories. There are cards that exist outside of these, but in general, cards are going to fall into either smoothers, refillers, or engines. So we'll start with smoothers. These are cards that are going to smooth the game, usually early for you. So I think a really good example of this, probably the best example of this, is Brainstorm. So Brainstorm is 1 blue pip for an instant. Draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So This card doesn't actually net you any cards because it takes a card to play it out of your hand, and then you have to put 2 cards back after you've drawn your 3. But it is shaping your hand. So smoothers are generally going to leave you card neutral or minimally card positive, but it is going to give you new cards in hand.
Yeah, you're probably going to net 1 card at most. And we're going to talk about some later, and you'll see why we're saying that. And you might say, well, why is that not card draw? Like you're drawing a card. I mean, technically you are, right? You're coming out net positive out of that exchange, except that that's not like refilling your hand, right?
Yeah, and it's also, you don't always get to draw cards when you play smoothers. So if you look at red card advantage spells, they're almost always something like impulse card draw or something where you don't actually get to keep the cards in your hand.
Yeah.
The Thrill of Possibility is an example of that. That's 1 in a red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you discard a card and you draw 2 cards. So this one's actually rummaging, where you're discarding first and then drawing. And that's different than how you would expect most card draw spells to play.
Yeah, and after you casting the spell, I mean, you get to see 2 additional cards, which is great. But your net new cards in hand or net cards drawn is like 0, right? Mm-hmm. Because you cast the spell, you discard a card, that's 2, and then that's 2 gone, and then you draw 2 cards, right? So you've not netted any new, I mean, you've seen 2 new cards, right? But not more cards in hand to refill it. So if you're down to like 2 cards at the end of the game, then you're casting this, discarding whatever you have in your hand, and then just getting 2 new things.
And so we would say that's card selection rather than card draw, but we count both card selection and card draw as card advantage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's mostly what smoothers are doing, is they're giving you some sort of selection over cards that you want to have in your hand. Smoothers act as redundancies, right? We're using smoothers to help us find more card draw, help us to find, more card advantage, more interactions, more ramp or lands. Often smoothers are early to help you hit land drops or help you hit ramp spells, and that's like when they're going to be the best typically.
Yeah, and we keep saying that you play these early, so that means that most smoothers are really going to be between like 1 and 3 mana to play.
Yeah, absolutely. They're obviously not going to be acting as redundancies in the same way as tutors are, where you can go just find the thing, but they're trying to help you find it or find whatever you need in a given situation and give you some selection over the cards you can have in your hand.
By seeing more cards.
By seeing more cards, yep, exactly.
Yeah.
The amount of smoothers you're playing and if you're playing smoothers at all, really, I think baseline you should be playing probably 1 or 2. We're going to talk about that a little later. It's really dependent on the play pattern of your deck, right? Higher cost commanders, for example, are going to want more smoothers to hit early land drops, to do stuff on your first few turns before you're ramping up into your commander. Those smoothers are going to help a lot. Additionally, cards that are built around casting a lot of spells and seeing a lot of cards are going to want smoothers as well. And we're going to talk about an example of that later.
Yeah, those cantrips are really important for those kinds of decks. So the next category that we want to talk about in terms of card advantage is refillers. So these are cards that are going to refill your hand later in the game. I think that one of the best examples of this, you'll notice it's also blue, and that's because all of kind of the prototypical, the best card advantage spells are going to be in blue. This one is Windfall. So this is 2 in a blue for a sorcery. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way.
Yeah, this is the ultimate example. I mean, outside of like Wheel of Fortune, which is inaccessible to most players, right? Is the quintessential example of my hand is empty and other people have cards in their hand. This is a great way for me to entirely refill my hand, even though I'm losing some of these cards, right? If you have 2 cards in hand and one of them is Windfall and someone else has 5, not only are you seeing awesome. 5 new cards, you're netting 3 cards in hand, right? Which is really, really good.
Yep.
For the most part, during a game, this is why fillers are important. We just want to make sure you guys understand that refillers are important to play. Because for the most part, when you're playing a game of Commander, you are trying to play a land and cast a spell each turn, potentially with the exception of turn 1, right? Mm-hmm. So that means at the end of turn 5, you're down to 3 cards in hand, right? You're going to drop to 4 on turn 6, but when you play land and cast a spell on turn 6, you're down to 2 now. And that is fine, right? Like, that's okay, but you're going to be happy to have more options and refill your hand on one of these later turns after you've been able to cast a lot of the spells in your hand already.
Yeah, so refillers are generally going to net you 2 or more additional cards in hand at a time. Um, an example of this that's not something quite as variable as Windfall is Harmonize, which is 2 green for a sorcery, draw 3 cards. It's good. It's fine to play. It's probably at the bottom end of our playable refillers. But in general, these are just cards that you're going to be casting turn 6, maybe turn 5, turn 6 or later to just get more options back into your hand. Get more gas, put more gas on the flame.
Yeah, exactly. The last thing we have here are engines, and engines are just the best versions of card draw, really.
Yeah.
And we're gonna our example here is probably the best engine, which is Rhystic Study. Rhystic Study is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Remember to pay the 1. Paying the 1 is important. For the most part, engines will be saying something like, the best engines at least, will be saying something like that. Whenever X happens, draw a card. And Rhystic Study just happens to care about opponents casting spells. There are other versions of this, but these are the most abusable card draw effects and will net you the most cards if you can get them to stick on board.
Yeah, so they're especially good early in a game because you're going to get a lot of those triggers, so you're going to be able to generate a lot more card advantage over the course of the game. So this is kind of on the higher end of card advantage.
Yeah, some other we're not going to mention very many of them, I don't think, in this episode. But some of the other engines that I think we would consider engines are things that happen like once per turn, like at the beginning of your upkeep, like draw a card or whatever. Those things will also count as engines, though they are significantly less abusable than some of the other ones that have a whenever X happens, draw a card.
Definitely. So that is how we're looking at card advantage in this episode. So let's talk about density. In terms of the number of card advantage pieces that you should be running in a deck, the number that we've come up with is that you really need at least 10, probably 11, at the very bare minimum. If you're not running, anything else, just 10 card advantage pieces.
Yeah. So we ran the numbers on this, and at 10 pieces of card draw in your deck, by turn 5, assuming you've drawn no additional cards, you have a 74% chance to see one of your card advantage pieces.
Yeah. That number actually goes up if you're running a smoother too, though, right?
Exactly. So that's why we're saying 10 is the baseline here, because 75% chance is good, but that's over the first 5 turns. And if you're not seeing, like we said, a card advantage piece over the first 5 or 6 turns of the game, you're having a pretty rough time. Like you're gonna
Your
have
hand's gonna
no
be
more
empty.
Yeah, you're gonna have no more spells to cast.
And that's not fun. And you're probably missing land drops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you're running 11 pieces, so just to paint this picture, we did this with no additional cards drawn by turn 5, and with seeing 2 additional cards. We're not saying drawing 2 additional cards, but seeing 2 additional cards by turn 5. And with 11 pieces, with no additional cards seen by turn 5 other than your 1 card draw per turn, you go up to 77%. That's a 3% jump. And actually the numbers here are, it's like 77.7 and 74.3. So it's actually like a 3.5% jump nearly. That's not a not insignificant jump to the next level here.
Yeah.
And let's say one of those ones you see in your first 5 turns stick with me, please. Let's say one of those 11 that you see in the first 5 turns is a smoother, right?
Yeah.
Smoothers are generally going to let you see at least 2 additional cards, right? Now we move to our calculations for 1 card per turn plus the 2 additional you see. So you're going to have seen by turn 5, 14 cards, I think. So you draw 7 and then draw 1 per turn and then 2 additional. So
go up to
7,
12
5,
and then
7.
up to 14.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So you've seen 14 cards at this point. If you've so to see 2 additional cards, you have to have played one of your smoothers. So now the remaining cards in your deck they're 10, right? If you started with 11 and you've cast your smoother, there are now 10 draw
more
pieces,
card advantage
10 more card advantage pieces in your deck.
Yep.
If you've seen 2 additional cards, you have an 80% chance of seeing one of them.
Yeah, that's a good size jump. That's a 6% jump.
Yeah, which is really good. So I think 10 is the bare minimum. I think really what we recommend is 11, right? 11 and one of them being a smoother.
At least one of them being a smoother. Yeah, so that's really the bottom end. Where it gets tricky, I think, actually, is on the top end. Because it's hard to say that there's such a thing as too much card advantage, because card advantage is just getting you more cards. That being said, after looking at the numbers, after looking at some play patterns, after looking at some deck lists, 13 to 16 is probably sufficient. And you really do probably need a good reason to include more than 16 card advantage pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Kelson's saying, it's really hard to, like, it's unlike ramp, which you typically want early. You're happy with card draw at any point in the game. Like, obviously, engines you want to play early, smoothers are probably better early, but any card advantage piece that you find, you're happy to find at any point because it's going to help you see more cards, right? So the relationship is pretty linear, that as you include more, you're going to see more. And so it is pretty tough. But yeah, after doing a bunch of research, 13 to 16 and more than 16, you're going to have a pretty good reason. And I really think, like we're saying, 10 or 11 is probably the baseline. Feel free to bump that up to 13 and say that 13 is the baseline.
Yeah, I wouldn't run less than 13. I don't know that there's a reason to. There's just not really a reason to.
I have been playing a deck that I've been working on. I've been playtesting, and it runs 13, maybe 14, but I think 13. And it has felt really good, and I've hardly gone a game without seeing one.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really great. And there are a few things that are going to influence probably the amount of card advantage that you want to see in your deck. And one of those is the strategy of the deck. And Spencer, you mentioned this earlier, that if you do have a card advantage piece in the command zone, you might be able to get away with running a little bit less. But we did want to look at the example of 2 of the Outlaws of Thunder Junction commander decks.
Yeah, Kelton was doing a lot of research here and was looking at precons and to try to figure out like how much should you be playing, and came across these 2. And it's really interesting, not only the difference in the types that they're running, which again is maybe a testament to how much your strategy affects the kind of card draw you want to be playing, but also how much one of them totally whiffs on playing an appropriate amount of card draw.
And I do think that, so we talk about precons being the bottom end of our power levels. So when we talk about a low power deck, precons are kind of the baseline for that. And that is one of the biggest problems with precons, is they're fairly inconsistent with their card advantage pieces, and that's usually something that needs to be upgraded. So that being said, the 2 Outlaws of Thunder Junction commander precons that we want to look at are Quick Draw, which is the Izzet Spellslinger deck, and then Grand Larceny, which is the Sultai Theft deck. What's really interesting, I should read the commanders for these really quick. So bear with me for a moment while I pull open Stella Lee Wildcard. This is 1 blue-red for a human rogue with 2 power and 4 toughness. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. So already, card advantage in the command zone. And then she has the activated ability, tap, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Activate only if you've cast 3 or more spells this turn. So to get the full value out of your commander, you're trying to cast 3 spells every turn. That's your turn. That's your opponent's turn. You just need to be churning through spells. So what's really good in this deck are cheap cantrips. So spells that cost like 1 mana and replace themselves with another card that costs 1 mana and does the same thing. So you can kind of loop those. So overall, you have card advantage in the command zone. This deck is still running about 20 card advantage pieces outside of Stella Lee, who is in the command zone. That is a lot. And it actually does range. It runs a ton of smoothers because, like I said, that's very good in this deck. But it also runs a ton of refillers and even a couple of engines, which you generally don't see in precon power levels. So this one's a ton, but it makes sense because that is the strategy and that is the play pattern of the deck. Is you want to be drawing a lot of cards, continually refilling your hand, so you can continue to cast spells every turn. Grand Larceny is a little bit different.
Yeah, I've got Gonti here. Do you want me to read Gonti?
Will you read that?
Okay, so this is Gonti, Canny Acquisitor. It is a legendary creature, Aetherborn Rogue, 5/5, and he costs 2 black, green, blue. I always feel like I'm going to mess one of those up, so I have to be seeing them really slowly. Spells you cast but don't own cost 1 less to cast. So already it's all about casting other people's spells, right? Whenever one or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library, then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. So obviously the plan here is to deal combat damage to players, steal their cards, and this is some card advantage in the command zone of a type that matters for this commander deck.
Yeah. That being said, there's actually nothing about this card that cares about casting spells you don't own. It just gives you more opportunity to cast spells you don't own, and then it makes them cheaper. So there's actually nothing that cares about that, but that is in general what the deck cares about.
Yeah,
That's
what the deck's
strategy
trying
of
to
the deck.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned this is also card advantage of the command zone. Very different than Stella Lee, right? Your cards are always going to be better than another player's cards. And when you dig into this deck and you look at the number of card advantage pieces outside of stealing opponents' cards, I think it was 0. I couldn't find one. And maybe I skipped over one, but it was 0.
It's really unwise to go so hard into this strategy and not include any card draw for your own cards.
Yeah.
And there's a couple reasons for that. Obviously, you can hit potentially card draw off of people's decks, right? When you're stealing their cards, which is great. You're not guaranteed to. And again, this doesn't care about casting spells off the top of player's library, like spells you don't own. It just makes it, like you said, easier. But that's like the theme of your deck, and there's a lot of cards in here that are trying to do that. And I can almost guarantee you that none of the spells that you hit out of your opponent's decks are going to help you cast spells you don't own.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And just think about how bad this strategy is. This strategy of card advantage, not the strategy of the deck, because I think the strategy of the deck is sick. This is one of my favorite archetypes in Commander. Think of how bad this card advantage strategy is if all you care about is getting creatures on the board and using that to generate card advantage, and then there's a board wipe and your hand's empty.
Yeah.
Now you have no card advantage. It's impossible to rebuild. Whereas with Stella Lee, chock full of card advantage, board wipe, doesn't care. I can draw into card advantage pieces that then get me more cards back into my hand to rebuild.
Yeah, that's a really good point because Gonti's thing is a combat damage trigger here.
Yeah,
and so you
and
need
a lot
Gonti
of the other
out.
cards in the deck are.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you need to be playing cards that draw you cards from your own deck.
So the strategy of the deck does influence the number of card advantage pieces that you're going to run. Stella Lee is a really great example of a deck that just wants more card advantage. But even if your strategy is something like Gonti, where it's like card advantage, kind of, you still just need card advantage. This deck needs a windfall. This deck needs those refillers to help the deck be able to rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, you do need stuff like that. I think another example of this is like a Muldrotha deck, right? Or any sort of graveyard deck. A lot of those decks run a bunch of self-mill, which one is very fine, like very good for the deck and the strategy. But if you're not running any actual card advantage pieces and you're just planning on getting stuff out of your graveyard each time, as soon as any of your pieces that allow you to do that go away, then just like with this deck, you're left with no cards in hand and then no way to cast the cards that you were hoping were in your hand by being in your graveyard.
And Muldrotha especially is such a target for removal. Nobody likes leaving a Muldrotha on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just have to come prepared with card draw to draw your own cards.
Yep, exactly. So the strategy of the deck is one thing that can influence the amount of card advantage pieces you're running. Also, just the play pattern. Are you trying to play your commander early? What turns are you trying to ramp? These can all be considerations of when you're going to be wanting to play card advantage pieces.
So I ran into this in a deck I was building. Again, the same deck I'm building recently. I'll talk about it at some other point. Maybe, should I just? It's not really a surprise. I'm building a Tana Tevesh partner deck, and I'm trying to build it at a pretty casual level. And Tevesh Zot is card advantage in the command zone. But the strategy of this deck, the goal of this deck is to not cast Tevesh until it's like a last resort. Right, so I'm playing.
Yeah, it's mostly a Voltron-y make Tana really big deck, right?
Yeah. It's trying to make Tana really big, make a bunch of Saprolings. It's trying to have I wanted to build a Saproling deck, and I felt like Tana did that really cool. And it's not I don't know. I felt like it was a fun version of that. That being said, Tana costs 4 mana. So what I'm trying to do in this game, and so okay, let me read Tana really quick. Let me read Tana the Blood
Yeah, because
Sower
it
for
does
you.
define the play pattern of the deck. Like the deck wants to be doing a very specific thing on a very specific turn.
Yeah. So Tana is 4 mana. She's 2 red green for a legendary creature, Elf Druid, and she is a 2/2 with Trample. And she says, whenever Tana the Blood Sower deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens, and she has Partner, which allows you to play her with Tevish. I'm not going to read Tevish just because it's not really relevant to this discussion right here. Tana the Blood Sower is awesome, and you might read this and think, cool, get through for damage, create Saproling tokens.
2/2 with Trample.
She's a 2/2 with Trample. So first of all, getting through for trample damage, your 2/2 is not going to cut it. And she costs 4 mana. So by the time you're able to get Tana out and try to swing through for damage, chances are people are going to have blockers, and blockers that are at least 2/2s.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to do with this deck is ramp up to either play Tana on turn 3 as consistently as possible, or play something else on turn 3. And then attack with Tana on turn 4 and play something that buffs her, right? Or ramp up to play something else on turn 3 that can give Tana haste and buff her simultaneously. And there's a couple of cards that do that.
Yeah, so it's generally ramp turn 2, play Tana turn 3, turn 4 buff Tana, swing in, damage, make saplings,
Right.
rinse and repeat. And so that's an example of a play pattern that doesn't want as many smoothers because
Right.
that's the time when you're generally playing smoothers.
Yeah, exactly. I have found that if ever I have smoothers in hand, they're being played on turn 5 or 6 as like a smoother to maybe find me something to play on that turn. And at that point, I'd rather play one of my like really big refill spells to be able to refill my hand.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really great example. And then to a lesser degree, the power level of your deck also does influence how much card advantage you may want to play. We mentioned before, generally, higher power decks may want to run a little bit more card advantage. However, a lot of times this actually manifests just in terms of redundancy by adding tutors. Tutors are often something that's more present in higher power decks, and those tutors are replacements for your card advantage, usually engines.
Yeah. I mean, in higher power decks, you're only playing the best versions of effects, and there's only so many you can run in your colors. And so you're often trying to find those some other way as well.
And speaking of colors, this is kind of the last thing that might limit the number of card advantage pieces you're playing. Some colors just don't have much good card advantage.
Yes.
Or
I was
any.
going to add to that, but that's exactly correct.
Yeah.
And we've kind of ranked them here. Please tell us if you disagree. But as far as we've experienced, and from looking through the different card advantage pieces that are available to you to make this episode, really it kind of goes from blue to black to white to green to red in terms of quality from high to low. Blue, great at card draw, does it really well, refills your hand, gets you to see so many cards. Red, you are also going to see so many cards, but you're going to be playing with fewer cards in hand because a lot of that is card selection or impulse draw.
I think I always assumed that white and green were going to have some of the worst, but as I was actually looking at cards, white actually has some really good pieces, and green does too. And green, I feel like, has a lot of really good refillers. White has quite a few good engines. Green has a lot of good refillers.
I honestly feel like, I feel like they both have really good engines because a lot of them care about, green cares about like creatures or combat damage or whatever. There's a lot that just like can draw you a bunch of cards. And it's easy to see why red falls to the bottom of this list because white has a lot of stuff that can draw you a bunch of cards with really good engines. And red just is like, okay, draw a card a turn or exile a card and you can play it next turn or whatever.
And the red ones are usually cheap. They're usually smoothers. And that's actually really good for a lot of things that red is trying to do. Decks that are more stormy or spellslinger decks. Those decks want those kinds of cards. So it actually fits in well to the archetype. Red.
Don't not play red. Red's the best. Our friend Steve would kill us if we said to not play red. But it does, the quality does vary. Your mileage may vary with the colors you're playing as far as the card advantage pieces you can play. And like we mentioned, even though the amount of card advantage doesn't change with the power level, what really does change is the composition of the card advantage pieces. Yes. Please tell us, Kelton. You did a little bit of this research, and you're going to put together a little nice graphic for us here.
Yeah, I'll put this up on the screen. But lower power decks will generally run more smoothers. Mid-power decks will generally have more refillers, and then higher power decks are generally going to prioritize engines. And just after doing a lot of research, playing a lot of Magic, this is generally what we're seeing out of these different power levels of decks.
I mean, this is exactly how I felt building decks. Is I feel wary to put in some of the best engines in my mid-power decks, and so I ended up putting like a bunch of refillers. And to the same effect, when I'm built like for our budget nights, and again, budget is kind of outside of our consideration for power level, but our budget decks certainly fall towards the significantly lower end of power level. And they're mostly playing a bunch of these smoothers that are getting you maybe a card and just helping you figure out what cards you want to play.
Yeah, which are smoothers are so good for these slower strategies, these lower power strategies. Smoothers are excellent. They're really good. And that's not to say they're not good. They just fit very well into that play pattern and into that strategy.
Yep, absolutely. So how about some examples?
Yeah, we're going to be doing this a little differently from how we've done in the past. Instead of just splitting them up strictly into power level, because like we said, it's mostly the composition that changes. We're going to talk about the different categories, so smoothers, refillers, and engines. And then we are going to talk about some higher power cards.
Yeah, some of the, like we've hopefully been hitting this on a bunch throughout the episode. Some engines are just objectively better than others. And so we felt those belonged in a separate category. But let's start out with smoothers. So we've already talked about one of these, and it is Brainstorm. We're going to talk about it again. This is kind of the quintessential, and I would argue the best smoother, even if you're not abusing it with any sort of shuffling effects. It's just incredibly good. Brainstorm, 1 blue, instant. Draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order.
Yeah, and you mentioned this, like it is abusable, right? So if you have a fetch land or any other way to shuffle your deck, being able to put the 2 cards that you don't want from your hand on top of your deck and then shuffle them away is amazing. The fact that it's instant speed is really important because you can hold up interaction, and then if you don't use that interaction, use something like Brainstorm to generate card advantage.
Yep.
It's great. It's very good.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes Brainstorm especially very good as a smoother is we've talked about seeing cards, and a lot of things will help you see cards. Like you can scry, that's how you see cards. Brainstorm puts all 3 cards in your hand, and you can choose to keep them, which makes it, I think, especially.
Yeah, you don't have to put 2 cards of the 3 that you've drawn back. You can put 2 cards that were already in your hand back.
Yeah, Brainstorm is very good. Most blue decks I think should be playing Brainstorm. It's just incredibly powerful as a smoother.
Yeah, at any point in the game as a smoother, it's very good.
Yep.
The next one is Faithless Looting. This is 1 red for a sorcery. Draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. It does have a very important ability. It has flashback for 2 in a red. Flashback means that you may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost and then exile it.
Yeah, Faithless Looting is an incredibly good card and does sometimes feel bad because you're net negative on cards at this point.
Especially after the first one, it feels bad.
Yeah, when the second one, you've now jumped back up to being, well, you're still net -1, technically, because
you are. But over
it's not caught you up ever.
Over
5 cards. Yeah, you've seen a
cards.
bunch of cards for sure, but you're still net -1.
Yeah.
Again, very good smoother, probably the best smoother in red, and it's because turn 1 smoothing is actually, I think, pretty underrated. You can keep a hand with a Faithless Looting, and that doesn't have a ramp spell, and you're gonna see 3 more cards by turn 2, and so probably.
Yeah, and also you can clear lands off the top of your deck. If you have enough lands in your hand, you draw a couple more lands off the top of your deck, then you can be like, great, I'm glad I got rid of those. So it's just good. It smooths your play. That's exactly what we're trying to do here.
Yep, these are all smoothers, like we said. The next one here is Night's Whisper. Night's Whisper is 1 and a black for a sorcery. You draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. And this is at the point at which you're going to be saying, well, this nets you 1 card, and this is exactly why we added this caveat to smoothers. Night's Whisper does net you 1 card, but it's not by any means refilling your hand. And especially on the early turns of the game, it's going to act like a smoother. This is another thing I ran into in my playtesting recently, is that on turn 2, unless you've had a turn 1 play, Night's Whisper is draw 2 cards, discard a card. And so it turns into like a thrill of possibility at that point, right? Because you're going to have 8 cards in hand at a turn.
Yeah, turn 2 Night's Whisper isn't actually all that practical, but a little later on in the game, it is a great smoother. And I will say, it's okay to only net 1 card.
Yeah.
A lot of effects that net you 0 cards are still just very good. Even cycling, that's what makes cycling so powerful. If, for example, lands that have cycling, that you don't need the land, so you pay 2 mana and turn it into a different card, that's a great effect for smoothing your deck.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly good. I'm not trying to dig on Night's Whisper at all, but we do put it in the
Why do you hate Night's Whisper so much?
because it sucks to play on turn 2.
Yeah. it does.
But we do put it in the smoother category because it's not entirely refilling your hand. Again, we talked about how smoothers are really good early. Really, smoothers feel great to play at any point in the game because you're going to get to see more cards. But some of them do perform exceptionally well early in the game.
Like this one. Elven Farsight. This is 1 green mana for a sorcery. Scry 3. Then you may reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, draw a card.
I think this card is so sick and criminally underplayed in green decks.
Yeah. I mean,
This is green Ponder, and people play Ponder in so many blue decks.
it's Ponder as long as you
Yeah, creature Ponder.
creature.
Green creature Ponder.
Yeah.
Yeah, but finding a
that's-
green
but
deck
that's
that's not
not-
playing creatures.
That's the thing that is not normally seen in green.
Yeah.
This is, do you want to guess how many, what percent of decks this is in on EDHREC?
Oh my gosh. I did already say criminally underplayed, so
Yeah,
I think
it is criminally underplayed.
I think it's in 0.8% of decks.
You know, that might be correct because it says 1% and it may round. So I think you're
Oh.
like spot on. Yeah, it's not played very much.
It should be. Play this in green. It's really good. Because the nice thing is it's. I mean, Scry is also just like very good.
Scry 3 is
Yeah.
really good.
You get to
Yeah.
look at the top 3, put any number on bottom, and if none of them are creatures, you can roll the dice and put that. And even if none of them are creatures and you're not going to draw a card, turn 1 Elven Farsight into figuring out what your next 3 draws are.
Yeah,
is
especially
so good.
once again, ordering land drops, right? If I have 2 lands in my hand and I ramp into another land, maybe something like a ramp piece, and then something, you know, that's a little more expensive, I can order those so that I can play the ramp while I have land and then draw into a land to hit a land drop. It really smooths out the way you play.
Yeah. very good.
We actually did pick one for each color in this category. So the white smoother is Cut a Deal. 2 in a white, so it's the most expensive one. For a sorcery, each opponent draws a card, then you draw a card for each opponent who drew a card this way.
This nets you 2 cards. It's really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it is pretty good. For 3 mana, you're drawing 3 cards. Each of your opponents is also drawing a card, but you are getting the better end of the deal.
Yeah, exactly. You've cut a very wise deal. The flavor text here is really awesome. I'm going to really quick. It's a win-win arrangement. I just happen to win the most.
I like
Which
that.
is very, very funny to me. Not objectively. You might think it's dumb, but I think it's amazing. Yeah, white. Okay, so Kelton said we chose one for each color in this category. We did really attempt to choose one for each color in all of the categories.
You'll notice the next one might be missing a color.
Yeah, some colors just don't have some. But this is, I think this kind of walks the line, to be fair to white, between smoother and refill,
Yeah.
right? Like drawing 3 cards for 3 mana is very good, and you're netting 2 cards out of it. But you go from like 2 cards in hand to 4 cards in hand, which is very good.
Yeah, and just most of the white card draw effects look this way. I will read the other one that's very similar to this. It's Secret Rendezvous. It's 1 white for a sorcery. You and target opponent each draw 3 cards. So it's the same thing, but it's just one opponent who's drawing the cards instead of all of them.
Yeah, you know what? I think now that I think about it, this one probably should have gone in our refillers category if we're calling Harmonize a refiller for green,
That's true.
because
Yeah,
it draws
it's
you the
just
same amount
bad
of cards.
because your opponent is also doing it. But it's also very political, which
Yes.
is a part of the game which I particularly enjoy. I like to make friends at the table.
Yep. So we don't have a refiller for white. This one probably is a refiller for the white. Either way, we had a hard time finding a smoother or a refiller for white, and so this one maybe
they're all
walks the line
kind
a
of this
little bit.
weird in between.
Yeah,
state.
exactly.
Well, let's jump into refillers.
Yes. I'll read this first one. It's Return of the Wild Speaker. So this is 4 and a green for an instant. Choose 1. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn.
I love this card so much. This
The
is
art is
actually
so
one of my
sick, too.
favorite card advantage pieces.
It's really good. You're just drawing a card for your biggest creature that's not a human, or drawing cards for the power of your biggest creature that's not a human. This one's it depends on your board state, right? So this one could.
It does. You
have
can whiff.
It can whiff. Can be super dead.
It
in
is
your hand.
instant speed. Someone can interact with the creature that you're targeting. Well,
Yeah.
you're not targeting. You would just get the next biggest power
Yeah,
creature.
do this. This is one that you. It's tough because if someone removes your creature to this, like you want to do this at the right time, but you also don't want to hold this up in case your creature gets removed. Like that's
Yeah, but it also it's 5 mana, so you are going to play this late, and in a green deck, you're generally going to have a big creature late. So
Yeah.
you're probably okay casting this. What makes this card so good is the flexibility.
yeah.
It's also
I really
like a mini overrun effect.
Yeah, it's so good. I really like using this card during combat. So I like to swing with a bunch of stuff. And then depending on how people block, if I can get through for some damage, maybe I'll cast it for the +3/+3. Or if I think my biggest creature is going to die and need some cards in hand, I'm like, okay, sweet. This is going to shake out okay, and I'm just going to draw a bunch of cards.
What a great scenario.
It's really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. The next one on the list is Stinging Study, 4 and a black for an instant. You draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is the mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. This can be very good, but it is a little more dependent on the deck that you played in.
Totally. This doesn't go in every black deck. This is not a refiller for every black deck. If you're playing the new Tiny Bones,
Not a good card in that.
do not play Stinging Study. But it will never whiff because you've got your commander in the command zone or on the battlefield. This is interesting. What if it's in your graveyard? Stinging Study does not
put
work.
Your commander in your graveyard.
Do
if
not
you're playing
cast Stinging Study. Yeah, that's I fairly often put my commander in my graveyard because I do play a lot of Reanimator decks.
I'm gonna get you with that sometime.
I don't play Stinging Study, but that would be unfortunate. That's an unfortunate. I guarantee that has happened to somebody because it reads,
or in your hand.
Yeah, because it reads like draw cards equal to your commander's mana value, but it specifically says on the battlefield or in the command zone, and I've never actually noticed that.
What is cool though is it says a commander, so if you're playing partners or you're playing backgrounds, you get to choose.
Oh, that is nice.
So if you're playing like a small mana value creature and then like raised by giants, then you can choose 6 for.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to get somebody with that. I can't wait for somebody to Stinging Study and for me to bounce their commander to their hand in response to Stinging Study.
Oh, that's so mean.
Oh, I can't wait to do that to somebody.
This is a good card though. We're making this sound like it's not a good card. It is a good card. Generally, you're going to be most happy when your commander is CMC 5 or more.
Yep, and in the command zone probably. Don't wait till they're on the battlefield for this probably.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be on the battlefield.
Yeah. I guess I'm just pointing out it's not infallible. To me, when I read this, it was like it always works, but there's times that it doesn't, which is interesting.
Well, the next one we said is like one of the best refillers, and it doesn't always work.
Yeah, that's true. This is Windfall. We talked about it earlier. I'm going to read it again. Windfall is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So the ideal scenario for this is that you've dumped all the cards in your hand, or most of the cards in your hand, and someone else has either been having a very slow game or been drawing a lot of cards. And then you get to cast this, ditch your remaining cards. Sometimes you want them. Too bad. You're about to see, hopefully, 7 more.
Yeah, most of the time it's 5 or 6, right?
Right.
But 3 mana, like discard your hand, draw 5 new cards is awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, you get very 5 new cards. That's really good.
Well, the next one is very similar.
It is, kind of. This is also a wheel effect, but it is Wheel of Misfortune, and this is our pick for a red refiller. This is 2 and a red for a sorcery. Each player, okay, bear with me. There's so much text on this card. We're going to talk about it when we finish reading it. Can we
read it and then give the TLDR on what it actually means? Okay.
Absolutely. Each player secretly chooses a number 0 or greater. Then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who didn't choose that number. And each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand and draws 7 cards.
Okay, can I give my interpretation of this and you can tell me if it's grossly incorrect?
Yeah.
So, everyone chooses a number secretly.
Yep.
You all reveal these numbers.
Yep.
The person with the highest number loses that much life.
Yep.
The person with the lowest number does not get to wheel.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Perfect.
You can have players choose the same number. So if 2 players choose the highest number, they both lose that much life.
Oof.
And if 2 players choose the lowest number, then neither of them get to wheel.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. So if you don't want to wheel, choose a negative number. Yeah. Oh, 0 or greater.
It's Dang 0 or greater, so you have to choose.
Dang it. Wizards, they thought of everything.
Yeah, this is, I think, a perfectly serviceable refiller. And, red, you got to go fast so you don't mind losing a little bit of life to do it.
Yep. Absolutely. And our white refiller here is Cut a Deal. We talked about it
Or
earlier.
Secret Rendezvous. Yeah. Yeah. White doesn't really have that many great refillers, but White does have some pretty good engines. So we're going to jump into engines next.
Yes, and the first one here is one of my favorites that I play in one of my decks. It's Dark Prophecy. Dark Prophecy is black, black, black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card and lose a life.
Hey, Spencer, which deck do you play this in?
I play this in my Shirei. We got chastised in the comments for saying Shiri because
I
it
still
is.
like Shuri.
I do like Shiri, but it's Shirei because it is of Japanese origin because it's Kamigawa.
You can really only play this card in a mono black deck, right?
Yes, I think probably. But if you're playing like aristocrats decks that can, play swamps, plays an Urborg, then maybe you're fine with this.
Yeah, heavy black at least. Probably mono black, but so easily abusable.
Yeah. This is honestly one I should consider putting in my zombie deck. I mean, it's a lot of black pips, but like.
Yeah, but also your zombie deck is primarily a black deck.
Yep. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
the next one here is in green, one of the better green engines. It is Garruk's Uprising. You want to tell us about it, Skelton?
Yeah, this one is actually one of my favorite card draw engines. So this is Garruk's Uprising, 2 and a green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card.
I forgot it gives creatures trample.
Yeah, it's
That's
so
crazy.
Good. So 3 mana, you probably have a creature out, hopefully, that has power 4 or greater. You get to draw a card when it ETBs, gives your creature trample, and you draw a card every time you play a big creature after that.
Yeah, that's really good.
And it's not even when you play a big creature, it's when it enters the battlefield, which is also very abusable.
That's very abusable. Well, because it counts tokens, right? It doesn't say non-token, which is
it's
very
just
good.
creatures. Yeah, this is a really good card. It actually, I think, was a little more expensive, and then it tanked in price because it got reprinted in the Enchanting Tales bonus sheet for Wilds of Eldraine.
Oh, that's awesome. It's 70 cents. Go pick one up. Put it in your decks.
This is so good in green decks. It's awesome.
The next one here is a classic blue engine. It is Archmage Emeritus. It is 2 blue for a creature human wizard 2/2 with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. Classic blue things, drawing cards.
Classic blue things. I do want to comment on Magecraft. It surprises me how often copy comes up.
Yes, copy. The copy is super relevant in Magecraft.
Yeah.
It's insane.
We've just started to have a lot more cards in the last few years that can copy spells.
Yeah,
It's something we've leaned pretty heavily into.
And a lot of them are in red. A lot of them are in red, and I think I should play significantly more of them in red because I've never thought about this, but I did notice it when someone was playing CDH the other day. They're basically red stack interaction if someone has already countered your spell, which is very good. And I've never thought about them that way. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it's quite good. The white one here is also very classic. This is Mangara the Diplomat. It is 3 and a white for a legendary creature, human cleric, 2/4. It has lifelink. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card.
Why does it specify with creatures? What else would you attack with?
Attacks with creatures. So I guess, would the alternate just be whenever an opponent attacks if 2 or more creatures are attacking you?
Well,
I think it's just the subject creatures. They're just trying to make that I think that's a grammar thing more than anything.
Yeah, but I think you could say whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures.
Yes.
Draw a card, right?
Well, and that's how Trouble in Pairs is.
I literally just pulled up Trouble in Pairs to see how they worded it.
That's how that's templated now.
Yeah. Yep. No, Mangara the Diplomat, also very good. One I've actually wanted to put in decks, but it's been pretty prohibitively expensive, at least for my budget. It was like $12, $13. It's now like $1.50.
Yeah, Commander Masters. Thank you,
pick one
I
up,
guess that's
Commander
one
Masters.
good thing that came from Commander Masters.
Honestly, okay, the Commander decks were garbage. Commander Masters was pretty like a lot of really good reprints. Obviously, some of the more powerful spells didn't have their price affected long term because they're just very good and they're going to stay high. But so many of these cards that just hadn't had meaningful reprints got a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
The last one here is a red engine.
There
We're gonna put
are
that in air
fewer
quotes.
engines in red for sure.
Yes. This one is Professional Facebreaker. Just an incredibly good card. It is 2 in a red for a creature, human warrior at 2/3 with menace. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So baseline, very good. And then it has sacrifice a treasure, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn.
Yeah, my initial response to this as an engine is you really only want this in treasure decks. And then you remember this creates treasures.
Yep.
And this creates up to 3 treasures per turn, which equates to 3 cards per turn. And
Yeah.
that's very good.
Okay, and I'm going to be pedantic here because it can create up to 6 if all 3 of your creatures have double strike because it's just combat damage.
You got me.
Yeah.
It's 6.
Okay, here's the thing. The only reason I say that is because one of my favorite times of getting Professional Facebreaker out, I also had Karlach out. So I was
that's
getting
disgusting.
2 combats and everything at first strike.
Yeah.
So it can, I mean, Professional Facebreaker, excuse me, is very good. And, but I do think people forget about the sacrifice of treasure portion of it. And this is kind of what quote unquote abusable engines will look like in red. There are some other ones that say once per turn, but because we were trying to find ones that were kind of a whenever, or you could do it more than once a turn, Professional Facebreaker was the one that came to mind. I'm tripping over my words today.
Do you feel like people don't play Professional Facebreaker for the third line, the sacrifice of treasure? I feel like that's the only reason I play Professional Facebreaker.
Really? I really like playing Professional Facebreaker for the
ramp.
Yeah, I was gonna say not for the first one because the first one's Menace. But
Well, I love Menace so much.
I love Menace so much. I just want more 2/3s with Menace. No, for the ramp, just because.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very different from how I see this card. Like I only read the last line on this card for the most part.
Yeah, I do feel like if you get a Professional Facebreaker out on turn 2 or 3, then it's like a baby Ragavan, right?
I mean, it's good. Top to bottom,
Yeah.
this card is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's that kind of rounds out our smoothers, refillers, and engines. We do want to talk about a few cards that you generally only see in higher powers, and these are all engines because, like we said, higher power decks generally just want to mostly be playing engines. And the first one, mentioned already, Rhystic Study. 2 in a blue for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Do you want to pay for Rhystic Study? Do you pay for Rhystic Study? Do you pay the 1?
Yes, and yes, every time. No, I mean, looking at the next one here too, I mean, these are all just very powerful. The next one here is Sylvan Library. I'm going to read it really quick, and then I'm going to finish my thought. Sylvan Library is 1 in a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your draw step, you may draw 2 additional cards. If you do, choose 2 cards in your hand drawn this turn. For each of those cards, pay 4 life or put the card on top of your library. So you can look at all 3, put 2 back, and keep 1 of them. So you get really good card selection, like baseline. Or you can pay 8 life and keep both of them, or 4 life and keep, 8 life and keep all 3, or 4 life and just keep 2 of the 3. It's just very good card advantage. I have seen this in a deck recently, and I remember talking to the player, and they're like, "Oh, it doesn't play any combos. This is probably like a mid-power deck." And I played what I consider to be a mid-power deck into this, and he played a Sylvan Library, and I thought, "Oh, this I wouldn't have expected to see this in a mid-power deck."
Yeah.
Like turn 2 Sylvan Library is just incredible card advantage over the course of the
It's
game.
really good because you get that card selection baseline, and that makes it a very good card. I do think this card overperforms on higher power decks because you're willing to just pay the 8 life to get those extra 2 cards into your hand because it accelerates you that much.
Yeah, and if you're playing in a playgroup like ours, or you're playing a high power deck, you're playing lots of fetch lands probably, and so you are able to abuse looking at the top 3, paying life strategically to keep them, or putting some of them back and shuffling them away if you don't want them. It's very, very good.
Yep,
The next one here is another pretty expensive one that is very good. It's Esper Sentinel.
I'm so excited that they're reprinting this in Modern Horizons 3. Oh, wait, it's only available in collector's boosters.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the retro frame, right?
Yeah.
Oh, dang it. Because I did see a video about that, but I didn't realize it was only being printed in collector's
I've
boosters.
been waiting for this card to get reprinted for so long, and they just will not reprint it.
It's really unfortunate. Here's the thing, though. I've noticed the price of this card is very cyclical. Like, it'll go up to 30 and down to 20 every couple months. So if you can just
20 is still a lot, though. I'm waiting for it to drop to 10.
I know.
So let's read this card. We haven't read it yet. It's 1 white mana for an artifact creature, human soldier, 1/1. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power.
Yep. So this is a baby Rhystic Study in white
Yeah.
for non-creature spells.
The first non-creature spell each turn.
Yeah. It's baby Rhystic Study in the sense that you're asking if they pay the one.
It's a Rhystic effect.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good way to put it. This one, I think, does scale with power level. Like, it's a very good white card draw effect, right? But it does scale with power level in that it is each opponent each turn. So if there are, like, stack interactions or stack battles going on, and each player is casting a non-creature spell, or people are tutoring at instant speed, or what have
A
you,
lot of cards.
you're drawing a lot of cards. You're drawing, a ton of cards per turn. It's like, at most 3 per turn, right?
Yep.
But that's still very good.
Here is another fun draw engine in black. This is Necropotence. It is black for an enchantment. Very heavy black, mostly just mono black decks or heavy black decks. Skip your draw step. I thought we were supposed to be drawing more cards. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard, okay? Here's the kicker. Pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library face down, put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step.
When we first saw this card and started playing it, we're playing it significantly less now because we've learned our lesson and we're not playing it in lower power decks.
Yeah.
But we were looking into the play patterns of this, and there's kind of 2 ways to play it. One of them being you pay 20 life, draw 20 cards, and shape your hand, right?
Mm-hmm. Discard down to 7 because this happens in your end step. You put the cards into your hand at your end step, and then you have the cleanup step, and so you're gonna have to discard down to hand size.
Yeah. So you shape your next 7, or you cast some spells, play a land each turn, and then pay 3 or 4 life, and make sure you end with 7 cards at the end of your turn.
Refill your hand at the end of every turn. That's very good. It doesn't matter if you're skipping your draw step because you're getting that card back at the end of the turn.
Yeah, it's incredibly good. And when I first started playing this, I forgot it said skip your draw step. So there were probably a couple times where I played this
You were
incorrectly.
just drawing so many cards.
Oh, yeah, it was crazy.
That's great.
The last one here is the most recently printed one, and it is debatably the best one here because it can go in every deck, and it is the One Ring. There's a reason this sold for $2 million. It's just that good.
No, it's not.
It's that good, baby.
That's funny.
The One Ring is a 4-mana legendary artifact with Indestructible. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each bird encounter on the One Ring, and it has tap, put a bird encounter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each bird encounter on the One Ring.
Oh, man.
I'm going to tell everyone my embarrassing evaluation of this card when it first came out that I posted on Reddit to a thread at one point. and it was that this card looks okay. It's basically Ancient Craving and colorless. So let me
That's
read
a bad take.
Let me read. Okay, let me
I'm
read
just
Ancient
kidding.
Craving really quick.
I
None
mean,
of us
it is
have
a bad
played this.
take, but nobody
It is a
knew
bad
how good
take.
this was going to be.
Yep, Ancient Craving is 3 and a black for a sorcery. You draw 3 cards and you lose 3 life. So over
It is Ancient Craving over 2 turns.
It's Ancient Craving
with
over 2
upside.
turns with protection, and technically you only lose 1 life on the second turn, so you lose 2 less life.
Yeah.
But I mean, come on, that's what it looked like when it first got released. It does not play like Ancient Craving.
No, and it's abusable. I mean, it's just there's so many things you can do with this card, but just in general, the thing it does the most is draw cards.
Yeah, I play this in my Garth deck, which is notably an untapped deck. So this card plays incredibly well in that deck because you get to draw a lot of cards each turn.
Yep, it's great. It's probably the best one, like you said, Spencer, because it's colorless and can fit into any deck.
Yep, if you're building a high power deck, you'd have to convince me not to put this in your deck for theme reasons, potentially, if you're looking for draw engines.
I guess if you just hate Universes Beyond, that's a reason not to play it. But other than that, I can't really think of a reason you wouldn't want to play it.
I mean, that's why I don't play Infinity cards.
Oh, do you just hate Infinity cards?
No, I mean, I just put one of them in my most recent deck, but I do have like a slight
love
beef with
Infinity
the. I wish they were silver border with acorns on them. I think, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it was a really fun opportunity to explore a different design space.
I think so too. I think putting stickers in,
Well, they've banned stickers now in constructed formats.
which I'm really happy they did because I think that was kind of, I don't know, it's just too much. They also banned attractions, right? It was just too much to like.
Yeah, no extra decks. You don't get any extra decks now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Total tangent. Go play the One Ring. It's great, but try and keep it a higher power because your play group will appreciate it.
Yep. Everybody, thank you for listening to our episode on Card Advantage today. I said card draw way too many times, I noticed. Card Advantage is what we were talking about today because we're talking about smoothers, refillers, and engines. Hopefully you like some of these examples. Hopefully you agreed with some of our takes. Hopefully some of you disagreed and have some thoughts about it. And hopefully you comment on our video and tell us why you disagree.
Yeah, and we'd love to know what Card Advantage pieces you like playing that we didn't talk about. There's obviously a ton. We just picked a few examples, but we'd really like to know which ones you enjoy playing.
Yes, please go check out the rest of our Power Levels episodes if you haven't. We've worked really hard on these. This is something that's been a long time coming, and we're excited for the culminating episode next week, so please join us then for deck building around Power Levels. Check us out on YouTube. That's if you're listening there. Then you can also listen on Spotify. If you don't want to listen on YouTube for some reason at any point, we're trying to get on other platforms as well. Check us out on our website, thecommanderpod.com. We're going to be adding resources about Power Levels there that is in the works, that is not currently available, but will be hopefully shortly. We love all of you. Thank you so much. We try to respond to comments. We try to be really interactive. Please let us know how we can be better, any topics you'd like us to talk about. We're always looking for other topics as well.
We've spent a lot of time talking about power levels over the last few episodes, so we're going to need some new topics here. We got a long list, but anytime you comment, it bumps topics up the list. So please let us know.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you everybody for joining us this week. We hope to see you next week. We hope to see you in other episodes as well. And until next time, remember to always pay the one.